Hey everybody, this is Craig with Out on Film, and welcome to the Out on Film Festival this year, where we are both in person and in our virtual cinema. And as part of our ongoing In Conversation series I am really pleased to have today the director and the star of Sexplanation, Alex Liu. Alex, welcome to Out on Film.
Thanks for having me.
Well, thanks for being here. I really enjoyed this film. I think much more than I thought I was going.
Good, I'm glad. A documentary is always a hard sell, I know.
I was like, okay, let's just watch this, but it's really well done on a subject that, we all think we talk about all the time, but actually I don't know that we actually do talk about it all the time in a positive way. So I guess just to start, kind of what made you decide that now's the time to tell this story in this way?
Yeah, so I was 36 when I finished the film. I'm 37 now. And I was entering my 30s. I had been out of the closet for 12, 13 years by that point. I thought, I don't have any shame around sex. But when I was actually having sex, there was still a lot of kind of disconnect from my body, disconnect from pleasure, fear of speaking up about my desires, fear of being very honest about how I felt. And I thought, well, I didn't expect to be this age and still have these issues. I thought this was something in my past. And as I started talking to friends, family, kind of, nibbling around the edges of this problem, I realized quickly, soon people were really quick to talk about it with me because they had the same kind of issues at around the same age. And so I thought, well, maybe there's something there. And this has been something that, has been something I've been pretty angry about for a long time, the suffering I went through during my coming out process. And so I started thinking, well, what would it look like to live in a truly shame-free sexual culture? And then as you start to do the research, you get even more angry because you realize the curricula for good comprehensive sex education, the definition simply is that it's medically accurate, right? So it's not, it's true. And then it's non-judgmental about orientation, desire, and identity, things you really don't have control over. And then simply also just gives you the tools to be able to talk about these things. They're very basic to me. It's kind of the floor of what good sex education should be. And it's been around for decades. It's been around for a really long time, but it's just so difficult to get taught in schools because school board members are scared to go on a limb politically and talk about how we need to talk about masturbation and normalizing anal sex. Like that's not a winning campaign platform in many school districts. And so I thought, okay, well, I'm having this problem. It's not getting better. I have this background in science reporting. I have this background in news. Maybe I can just talk to some of the most interesting, educators, researchers, scientists, tell them my deepest, darkest fears, shames, desires, and just go from there. And the result is the documentary.
Okay. So you take us on a journey through a very sex positive way of talking about sex that is frank, talking to different experts and everything. It gets a little less frank when you're talking with just various people and people are trying to talk about sex. One thing you do is you not only take us on that journey, but you take us on your journey. And you put a lot of yourself right out here. How was going through this journey for you, kind of going through it and then doing it on film? Kind of, what's that like?
Yeah, it is difficult. It is torturous might be too hard of a word, but it's very scary. It's very vulnerable. It's terrifying, especially when people first started seeing the film. What is your family, friends? How are they going to think? But my initial conception of the film really was just like, I have a background in science reporting. I worked for Nova Science Now. And so my thought was this would just be like a really sexy episode of Nova. It was going to be like, the sexiest episode of Nova ever. But I have an amazing writing partner. His name is Leonardo Neri. And he kept asking me like, okay, this is interesting, but I don't know if it's compelling. Like, why are you doing this? Like, really, why? And in the stories of me telling why, he kept pushing me like, well, maybe that should go in the film. Maybe you need that kind of story to bring people through to get to the parts that you want them to internalize, where they think critically about sexuality. So yeah, it was a slow, long process where I had to be gently coaxed to kind of reveal these things. But yeah, it's kind of what I I hope people can take that as a model, maybe that everyone, whatever it is, the little baby steps you can take in your life to be a little more open about sex and sexuality. I think, at that initial moment, it's probably terrifying and you don't want to do it. Like when I first said I'm gay was probably one of the most scariest moments of my life. But now here I am talking to you in a public forum about all of it, right? And so it just takes time. And my life is so much more open and fulfilling and meaningful because I did that. So hopefully you can see through my process, it might take a while, but it'll pay off in the long run.
What's one thing as you went through this process and the filming and the putting the film together, what surprised you?
Honestly, the biggest surprise was my parents. I put my parents in the film first just to talk about why we never had talked about sex really at all as I was growing up. And then at the end, I have a conversation with them, kind of then finally saying like all the things I've been keeping from them. And it's been a surprise. One, just how lucky I am, how open they are, how amazing they have been to support me on this journey. But then also now, we don't talk about sex too much in our relationship now. But now that we've kind of like broken that barrier and now I've gotten to, there's really nothing I feel, there's always going to be boundaries, I think, with parents is healthy. But now that we kind of broached some of the last things that I was scared to talk to them about, our relationship is now much more like that of friends than of parents and child. I feel much more just relaxed and open, and being able to get to know them as human beings has been a huge surprise, and it's paid off in a big way. And now I know, thanks to my dad, he's given me a lot of great tips on ED medication that I should look into as I get older. So that's been a fun journey with him. I feel like now I have at least someone I can talk to as I get older about what my sex life might look like.
I mean, like your parents are adorable. Really, really are. How was it kind of getting them involved in the project and getting them to open up the way that they did? I mean, you can tell there's a lot of nervous laughter, but it didn't feel overly voyeuristic. So it was an intimate conversation that y'all are having that allowed us in to see how a family can talk about.
Yeah, I think, I give them a lot of credit. When I came out, the initial reaction was that of, okay, well, get him into therapy. Let's meet local gay people in the community. So Alex has someone to talk to. They've always been very much focused first on kind of my happiness, well-being. So I think that luck that I have there gives them kind of made me feel a little safer knowing that that would be a productive conversation. And I think I've been, we cut this out of the film. My parents are a little stereotypical Asian parents in terms of like, I think my dad is just really bummed I'm not a battery engineer. He thinks that's where the money is. And so, it was, for them, it was a little curiosity of like, why is this so important to Alex? Getting them to see it. And I only had 2 conversations with them, so they never saw the middle part. But it's been so wonderful. They were the first people I showed the final cut to, simply because they're in the film, so I need to make sure that they're okay with it. And I was so nervous the night before. I was like puking. It was like, I was just so terrified. But now I think my dad especially now kind of gets what I'm trying to do, understands what I'm trying to do. And he's happy that maybe this was a very roundabout way to have this conversation. I needed like the artifice and the filters of making a movie. But he's happy, I think, that now he understands what I'm trying to do and understands the value of it, which has been great.
I mean, I have to say, it must break some kind of barrier and boundary when you sit and your mom tells you you're a messy masturbator.
Yes. That's like always the biggest laugh whenever people watch it. And this thing that I've been so ashamed of for so long, finding that people actually can relate and it's funny and we have this funny moment has been a big weight off my shoulders. Yeah, so I think definitely once you've broken that barrier, there's really very little you can't talk about. Yeah.
I mean, you can see families all over, sitting down to dinner all over the country now. but I think particular, I mean, that's such a nice scene with the three of you, and earlier than that with your grandmother, but for gay kids, for queer kids who, like you said, I mean, you didn't get to talk about this as a kid. I think it's different for us, especially because we don't have a peer group necessarily to
Right.
even to give misinformation about.
Right.
I mean, what's your hope that as you know, queer kids, queer people, parents see this? What's your hope that they're able to take?
Yeah. I think the biggest thing for me in making this film that really shifted how I see sex education is, before I just thought of it as I was a little bit more like almost fundamentalist, most like dogmatic about what sex education is, that all kids need to get the, you know, WHO approved version of comprehensive sex ed. It needs to be taught in every school. And the reason is so that the kids can have the best sex life that they want. But I'm realizing more sex and sexuality is so much more than just what you do in the bedroom. It's such an integral facet of how you express yourself in all ways. And it's something that I think that in many families, once you hit a certain age and it becomes uncomfortable to talk about, you lose that disconnect. And so my framing for my sex education isn't so much around, of course, you need to know all the things. You need to know how these diseases are transmitted, how you get pregnant, what's going on in your body. But so much more, I think it's about how do we talk about these things? How do we have the difficult conversations? Because sex is hard, you know, it's really hard to have good sex. And if you're silent about it or you can't talk about it, then there's no way you can win. So making sure you can have conversations with the people that you love around these things is, I think, kind of the big benefit of sex education, because only in those conversations can we move the culture forward in a positive direction. And so I hope that when people see this, you know, even if you're the parent of a queer kid or you're a queer kid who has parents who are not queer, that you realize that, you know, I wouldn't, it's scary to have a long conversation, but the slow 1 minute, 2 minute conversations, right, checking in, talking about these things, you know, creating that safe space, and giving people the benefit, the good faith benefit that if you're asking a question or trying to broach it, that's difficult. So give people the space to actually, you know, listen to them non-judgmentally and start to have the conversations that I think really just make life just so much more juicy and meaningful. So that's my long-winded answer of what I hope from the film.
So you have a lot of people who have, you know, conversations. You have friends around a dinner table. You are all talking. How did you get people involved and to be able to open up and willing to talk about, you know, sex on screen? And how did you kind of approach people and kind of get them on board?
Yeah, and I think you know, it's simply the thing I've learned the best in this process, even though I'm doing a lot of talking now, is the skill that we don't learn around this is listening. So I think if I were to go to my friends and just tell them all the reasons why they needed to do this, you know, is not really productive. But if I kind of maybe just say, like, this is my issue, like, do you relate, and just listen to them and give them the space so they understand, like, Alex actually cares about what I have to say. He's not trying to push a certain agenda, though at the beginning maybe I kind of did want to push a certain agenda. But I think developing that non-judgmental listening skill has been one of the best benefits I've learned to have, for myself, to feel less shame around sex, because you know, you get so much more listening to people and their stories and how they experience sex, and hearing how the differences and the diversity around that has been so great for me to be okay with who I am. So I honestly think, you know, if you can do that for people, if you can be that person who is a great listener and really kind of engage with them and think critically around these issues, people will open up in the most amazing, vulnerable, beautiful ways. So that's something that I think I've really taken through this process.
And what is it? One of the things that kind of struck me in watching the film as it unfolded, when I was a little bit surprised at the number of adults who really don't know a whole lot about sex and body.
Mhm.
But you know, as you start with, like, so much of the education that we still get is all kind of unwanted pregnancy and disease based,
Mhm.
you know, sex education. And then for gay people, it's hardly any except
Right.
peer group and you know, and organizations. But one of the things that as you weave through and start talking not just to experts about bodies and positivity, but also that whole discussion that becomes about pleasure and desire. You know, and I think too, I'm not sure that that's something that we necessarily talk about. One of the things that struck me is that I mean, we're gay people, we talk about sex constantly,
Mhm.
but it's so in technical terms.
Mhm.
I don't know that we necessarily have these conversations around pleasure and desire.
Yeah, and I think there's like I don't know what it is. I don't know if you relate to this, but because the messages I got from organized religion around sex, but especially queer sex, were so overwhelmingly negative and so shameful and really destructive. How I experienced sex as I started to get older was almost a reaction to that, like a big middle finger to the
Yeah.
church, you know, like that I would suck as many dicks, you know, as possible
Yeah.
because, you know, fuck you.
Right.
And I think that in itself, you know, I think that's probably what I missed in that though was the spiritual aspect of sex. Like I didn't think hard about what am I actually getting from these exchanges? How is it actually feeding my health, my soul? To think about the different ways to have sex. A quick one night stand can be a beautiful, amazing thing. I've had many great ones, but I've also had ones that, you know, if I had just thought a little bit more, you know, maybe weren't as healthy for me. And we don't talk about that, or I don't have many conversations about
Right.
that around like, you know, like what is actually good sex? You know, how does sex actually, when does it feel bad and when does it feel good? What do you need? What are the ingredients? And so I think, yeah, it's great to talk over brunch about the last hookup you had and how amazing it was. But what I'm learning as I get older and as I've gone through this process is what I'm really searching for, what I really have most questions about are how do you have that kind of sex that make you feel seen, known, heard, make you feel you know, playful, like a child again in many ways, you know, that beauty of the world, and feel connected in a way that, you know, when you're connected to a person in that right way, it's hard to describe, but it's just one of the most intense, beautiful things in the world. And I don't know that I have many conversations around that. So yes, I think the more we can talk about that, I think the more sex that we'll all be able to enjoy.
Right. Were you surprised in the conversations that you were having with some of the people who work in this field, like about normalizing fantasy and that you know there's this disconnect between, you know, what we look at in online or, you know, the whole thing with Pornhub, but the whole, you know, it's kind of like it's fantasy.
Mm-hmm.
Have these thoughts, we have these desires, and it is what it is. But you know, there was a kind of this like, oh, okay, we can normalize this too.
Yeah, I think it's interesting how I kind of almost put porn as like its separate, special, dirty, sinful, you know, form of entertainment. But really, I think we should think of porn as just one aspect of a huge landscape of media, right? So it's just one part of the media landscape. And I do think, you know, much like Hollywood is going through right now, porn is maybe like 20, 30, maybe 50 years behind in terms of like the narratives they're pushing
Right.
around a lot of different things.
Right.
You know, like I think if you were to look at even romantic comedies of 30, 40 years ago, there would be a lot of things in there you would not like,
Right.
around gender roles or around
Right.
race, a lot of things, right? And porn hasn't really gone through that reckoning yet. But it's interesting because I do think like you know, we love a lot of really taboo entertainment on TV and movies. You know, it's violent, it's criminal. You know, it's not something that we would ever do in real life, but it's really fun to watch
Right.
done, right? And so why wouldn't porn be in the same way, right? There's a lot
Right.
of things that are intriguing and arousing and engaging and fun to watch. But that doesn't mean that it's something we want to do. And I think that because the narrative around porn has just been so negative, that had just kind of been my assumption. and to help me think that through. Yeah, yeah, there's Disney movies that I've watched 50 years ago that I think are problematic and I would never watch again. Just like there's porn, but there's also great Disney movies and there's great porn, you know. So I think you need to be able to think with a little more nuance around porn and fantasy and desire. Yeah, that's been something that's been a huge weight off my shoulders for sure.
I mean, as you've gone through this process and as people are watching the film and reacting to it, what kind of reactions are you getting?
I think the best reactions I'm getting are from new parents and older couples, like couples who have been together for decades, who have told me that when they watch the film, they're pausing every 5 minutes to have a discussion they've never had before in their life. I mean, that if I think about it, I'll cry, because that's what I was hoping for, and I think it leads to such more connected, wonderful, beautiful relationships. With new parents, you know, I think we've now gotten a bunch of texts from new parents who are like, my kid was getting an erection in the bath, like my 6-month-old, 1-year-old now swatting their hand away. I was uncomfortable with that, and they were able to see right away that in itself was a shaming message. And there's actually something innocent in a child discovering the pleasure of their body. That is one of the greatest gifts we have as human beings, is that the ability to have a body that feels pleasure, and for them to be able to then talk with their partner, how do you want to deal with this, rather than just be silent and try to sweep it under the rug. So those are the types of reactions that we were hoping for, didn't know if we would hit, and it's just been wonderful to hear.
Do you think, like, kind of given where you started and kind of where we are right now, do you think that that we are becoming more sex positive in the?
Well, I think for sure. I mean, just the last couple of years alone, I think Gen Z has no problem at all with a lot of the issues that we talk about. Though I still think that most people are just the nature of being human is that it's difficult to talk about these very vulnerable things, and hopefully the film can help people with that. But yeah, I definitely think there is less shame around sex. I definitely think, and when it comes to entertainment media, there's way more diversity. You know, like I now see stories where there are queer people and them being queer is just incidental to their character rather than the core part, and they're able to experience joy and love rather than just tragedy. I think it's been, even when we were doing, there's a graphic in the film around how bad sex education is in many states, but even in the last, it's already out of date because things are getting a little better. So I definitely see there's a positive direction, and hopefully more and more parents can understand that sex education is for the kid, but it's really for the family, and that's the message that we hope resonates.
Well, and I think so, because that's one of the things that kind of struck me, that it wasn't just adults talking about sex, that you brought in families talking about sex with parents, but also like the workshops that you film where parents and kids are talking about sex in a positive way. And, a couple of them are squirmy, but they're all, but it does seem like this is a way of really connecting people. Friends or communities, but families and communities. And it seems to be, if we can open up and talk about sex and sexuality and how our bodies work in a positive way, or even in a knowing way, that it does provide greater connection rather than the shame that provides. I think you said you experienced with your own family.
I think if you define, at its core, spirituality is that feeling of connection with the people and things and places around you, that kind of ineffable love and beauty. I'm still kind of figuring out what my definition is, but if that's your definition, the more we can avoid those moments of disconnection and create moments of connection, I think just the more fulfilled and meaningful life becomes. And sex is such a huge part of how we disconnect. And so to kind of reconnect that in a way that is healthy, I think is a huge goal of ours.
So tell us, what is happening with the film? Kind of, I think you're making the film festival circuit. Tell us, what are the plans for the film?
Yeah, so we'll be in film festivals up to the end of the year. We'll see what's happening. I really hope that we can kind of almost do a university college tour I think that makes a lot of sense. And then, yeah, we're hopefully this will be much more widely available, not only in the United States, but across the world. Because I think hopefully there's something in it for everyone, regardless of your orientation, gender, ethnicity, nationality. Sex is something that connects us all as humans. So the more we can be having those conversations across the world, the better.
So it just kind of, I'm always curious, when you start a project and then you see the finished product, is it what you envisioned, or were you surprised about where you wound up?
Well, I can only speak for a documentary, right? Because you go into an interview and you think it's going to be one thing, and then I spoke to a Jesuit priest and I thought it was going to be one thing, and it ended up being something else. And I was like, okay, this changes the entire arc of the film. So I think, especially for documentaries, you have to go with the blueprint, because if you don't, then you just end up with thousands of hours of film footage that you don't know how to put together. But you have to be flexible enough to be able to shift when the narrative shifts, and it's challenging, but it's just kind of this amazing, beautiful, surreal quirk when you see the end product and you think about what you thought it would be, and it's kind of a fun way to think about that journey.
Just as we kind of come to the end of our time, I'm just curious, having been so vulnerable, put so much of yourself out here, which is, I think, really a beautiful moment.
Thank you.
How did you come, as you come through that, as people are thinking, I don't know that I could be that vulnerable. What's the reward?
Yeah, I mean, it took 6 years to make the film, so okay. Don't think it's going to happen overnight. It took a lot of baby steps to get there. But yeah, I think queer people understand this much more intimately. That I mean, saying the words "I'm gay" literally made me want to kill myself, and I'm so glad I didn't, because now here I am 20 years later. And life has never been more open, more meaningful. I've never had as deep of connections with the people in my life. I've never had, I mean, it's hard to describe, I think, for people who aren't queer in many ways, but the bonds you form by being able to be like fully self-expressed, there's really few barriers or, that you have, and you form a true community like that knows you and loves you for who you truly are. I mean, that's the best part of being alive. That's the stuff that life is made of. So I think sex is just one of those things that for many reasons we've kept quiet, and I think it's a big barrier for people to form true, real, meaningful connections on a level you never thought imaginable. But trust to something and get that level, it takes time. So whatever baby steps you can do, don't talk about your sex life, talk about something you heard in the news, to talk about something, your friend, whatever it is, but then slowly to get comfortable and find the people who are willing to, not only listen to you, but open up as well. And you'll just be amazed at how much love there is in your life.
I think that's a beautiful place our conversation. Alex, thank you so much for joining us, and thank all of you for joining us here at Out on Film. The film is A Sexplanation, and I hope for those of you who've just seen it before this talk back, I hope that you enjoyed it. And if you're watching this talk back first, go check out A Sexplanation. It is certainly worth your while. Alex, thank you again for being with us. We really do appreciate you taking the time to talk to us.
Thank you. Yeah, thanks for listening.
Thank you, everybody.